I think the best way to do it from a company perspective is really aligning your programs to either what your products or services are or what your mission of the business is. The more you can connect that back to your values, the mission, the more impactful I think it's going to click for employees. It's going to feel like also part of a cohesive benefits package that your company is providing to really make sure that people understand why you're doing this. Otherwise, it can kind of feel a little bit more like a laundry list of check boxes. And so I do encourage employers to really think about all the things they're offering, whether it's financial, wellness and mental well-being, core benefits. They really should be thinking about this from a strategic perspective that's part of a portfolio that connects back to like, what do you want employees to remember about your company? Is it what you do? Is it how you do it? Is it why you're all here? How can you make sure that that is interspersed within all of your programs?
Paloma Thombley oversees the HR function and talent acquisition team at Handshake, a leading platform used by over 1,400 colleges and universities to help connect students with employers of all industries find their first job and internships. In the 4 years since she joined Handshake, the company has tripled the size of its workforce and expanded globally. She is passionate about developing teams and managers, improving the employee experience, and building the right processes and structure for scale to get ahead of the things that may break before they happen. Paloma, welcome to Voices of HR.
Thank you so much for having me, Berta. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we are so excited that you are here because Handshake has a brand out there, particularly with students and universities, where I have a new college grad and I sit on a board at a college and university. And it is something that these students absolutely find necessary as they are finding that first job. And as you said in the intro, as an internship as well, for an internship as well. So let's start here. You have been behind a significant growth at Handshake, and most tech businesses and companies, average employee tenure is 18 to 22 months. Handshake is over 4 years. Give us a secret.
Yeah, so I think there is a little bit of a misconception that people would prefer to job hop or move from company to company. We're
Mhm.
seeing with a lot of our most recent data from the Handshake Network Trends reports that we do regularly, Gen Z, including the class of 2024, they're actually looking for job stability and financial security in their roles. I don't think that's much different from what we've seen from earlier, earlier generations or earlier classes. For us at Handshake, it's really important for us to provide a pathway that people can see themselves growing in their careers. The number one reason that people leave their companies or leave their roles is they don't feel like they can grow their careers at the pace and at the
Mhm.
level that they would really like to. And I think Gen Z especially, they have seen that, if you wait for things to come to you or you wait for things to happen passively, you may be behind your peers. You may sacrifice a lot of long-term earning potential if you are not really more aggressive about driving your own career growth. And so, but if you have the opportunities internally at a company to make sure that people can see, hey, I'm doing well, I'm getting this positive validation through performance cycles, through feedback from my manager. I know what it takes to get to this next level. I've talked about where I want to get to in 2 years, and my managers told me, what's realistic and what's not. If you're having those conversations and people can see how they can develop internally, I think that's really important for people to stick around. The other piece of this is that I think this is especially true for Gen Z, but also, as part of, I think millennials as well, are really connected to the mission and culture of a company. It's not so much even necessarily the brand name of it, but they want to feel really good about where they're working. They want to feel like they're making a difference. They want to feel like the company and the work they're doing is something they can maybe talk to their parents about or talk to peers about, and like it's it resonates well. I think Handshake benefits really strongly from having an incredibly strong mission where we're directly impacting students, we're directly impacting lives. That coupled with a strong company culture where it's highly collaborative, very connected, I think all of these things have created a lot more retention than you would typically see in tech. But I don't think this is out of reach for any company. I really do think that if you have the opportunity to create these paths for people, make them want to stick around, they will.
Mm. Even Gen Z.
That's
Even
right.
Gen Z. So we hear a lot in the press about how Gen Z is so different. And you're starting to maybe take us a little bit down the path of they're not much different than past generations. But they're also, I think I've heard you say that they're actually closer to the baby boomers than maybe what we think. How so?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how these trends evolve over time. But
Hmm.
I think right now, from the data that we have, you look at how tumultuous the last several years have been, especially for students who, they went into college and it was just like, and just COVID was just starting. They're coming out of
Right.
college and there's still a lot of like turmoil and change in like what are norms within work. There's still kind of this lingering instability related to COVID, related to the economy. They're really looking for that stability. They're looking for a place where they can build a career. Our latest report on the class of 2024 actually found that 77% of respondents, they're more likely to apply for a company that offers job stability more so than maybe like flashy perks or high compensation. They want to be somewhere where it's like, okay, I feel like the ground is steady under my feet because I haven't had that for so long. And I think that's really consistent with what we saw in previous generations, where it's like people are looking for a company to build a career out versus just using it as a stepping stone.
So you're also seeing, and I believe this was from your 2023 report. So I think what I had read in there is that Gen Z, more than half of this year's graduates expect to carry a student debt load. And of those, almost 70% say their debt will influence the jobs they consider after graduation. What are some of the benefits that companies are offering now to differentiate themselves and entice these poor debt laden graduates to come to work for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think coupled with that search for job stability is looking for benefits that are specifically going to address this burden that people are coming in. They're not coming
Mhm.
in. They're coming in behind, right? They're coming in negative. When you have this
Mhm.
level of debt that's going to be following you, you really need to be thinking very smart about where you're going for your first job, your second job. You don't have a lot of wiggle room to make mistakes. We've seen that there's a huge opportunity for companies who recognize that this is a real need for employees that are joining the workforce and offering benefits like student loan repayment programs, which used to be really uncommon. I would say in the mid 2010s, you did not see a lot of companies offering this. It was very rare. Now, though, the share of job descriptions on the platform that mention student loan repayment programs as a benefit has more than doubled since 2019. And the
Mm.
industries that we're seeing this with the most full-time jobs that mention student loan repayment are the ones that are really they're really in dire need of people to fill roles within their companies. So, healthcare and services, 31% of those are now featuring a student loan repayment function because they're very depleted over the last several years. They need to make sure that they're bringing people in, and that's a benefit that they know will help ease that kind of pain of coming out of school for folks. Nonprofits even are advertising this as well. So it's not something that are just for like really big tech companies. We're seeing it come from a variety of industries.
So we have a lot of small to mid-size HR pros listening today. So just for, student loan repayment program 101, what exactly is that?
Yeah, so these can take a few different shapes. So if we're talking about, they can be kind of exactly what you're thinking, where it's like, okay, there's a stipend or some sort of like third party that the company has partnered with to help make sure that the payments are going through. There can be others where it's more related to continuing education and helping to address costs there. But
Mm.
you should know that you don't have to be a big company to offer these types of benefits. Just offering them in the first place tells students that this is something that you care about, which I think really is going to pique their interest more. One thing to be aware of, though, is that there's the Secure Act 2.0 that's going to be coming into effect next year. There's a lot of new provisions to promote savings, boost incentives for businesses, and offer more flexibility for people who are saving. And part of that act actually allows employers to consider student loan payments as elective retirement contributions. So there's a lot of like interesting ways you can structure maybe existing benefits to appeal better for this next generation of job seekers.
HR pros definitely want to be in the know about that. With regards to Gen Z, we're also hearing a lot about mental health and that they are entering the workforce. I think the stat was upwards of 50% have either been diagnosed or are being treated for mental health. And so that's something else that you're encouraging employers to think differently about. What are some best practices that employers are leveraging today?
Yeah. I think you're seeing that people coming into the workforce, they've had, like I mentioned previously, a really challenging several years. They weathered profound
Mm,
anxiety, isolation during COVID. There's a lot of economic uncertainty right now. So they're not just looking for job stability, they're also looking for things that I feel like are more sustainable, especially from a work life balance perspective, because they're more than I think any other generation, they're coming into the workforce with a very acute knowledge of stress and burnout and all of these
mhm,
concepts that really got introduced more to people that were already in the workforce a
right.
few years back. And so they're looking for employers who from the start are going to support their well-being because they
Mm,
know that this is something they need to track just like their physical health. They know that this is something they need to manage and monitor. They're very conscious of it. And so we're seeing this manifest in actually a few different ways. For example, what we're seeing from our data is that 69% of students are more likely to apply to a job with a flexible schedule because they want to make sure that they're finding something
mhm,
that works for them, that's not creating undue amounts of stress around how do I manage, maybe the expectations of my life. Maybe I'm helping to care for family members or provide support to friends, whatever it is, and also do this job. I want to make sure that it kind of can work with the life that I want to create.
I love that about this generation. They, unlike the baby boomers or even millennials, they're saying, you know what? I've seen my parents work 60 to 80 hours a week, and I don't want that. I love how every generation they kind of change it up a little bit. And this generation, I think, is getting it right. I think they're getting it right. They're also getting it right, from what I read in your report, financially. So not only their health and their mental health, but their financial health is where they look maybe a little bit more like the baby boomer population. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think they're very aware of this. Kind of goes back to what I was saying about job stability as well. They're
Mhm,
very conscious of debt. They understand
mhm,
how debt can compound over time.
mhm,
They've seen, I think, enough horror stories from the generation before them of people who are in the same position that they were when they started work because they haven't addressed their debt in a timely way. And so I think from a financial perspective, they're focused on how can I make sure that I'm not missing anything? I'm not leaving anything on the table. How do I make sure I'm
mhm.
negotiating fully for my offers? How do I make sure I'm getting full use out of the benefits and perks that are provided to me as a company? How do I make sure that I'm contributing to my 401k in a way that's really going to benefit me 5 years, 10 years down the line? Because they know
Mhm.
more than any other generation that if they don't do these things, they may actually not be able to do a lot of the things like purchasing a home, starting a family on the timeline that they want to do it. They're a very aware generation.
They are, and that is such a mature concept because I don't know about you, but I remember starting the workforce and remember my father-in-law told us, just put in 1%, just 1% because we had college debt. Our
Mhm.
parents didn't pay for us to go to school. And we did. And with every raise, with every promotion, we put in another percent. And so gradually and eventually, we hit the maximum for years and years. But it's interesting how this generation, if I talk to any of Lauren's friends about finances, they already know about 401k. They know about getting the match and they know about compound interest
Mhm.
and
It's great.
returns. It's amazing.
It's great. I mean, the
So
power of TikTok.
it is the power of TikTok, isn't it? So that kind of reminds me. So if you're an employer and you want to increase loyalty, one of the ways that you do that is obviously you offer fantastic benefits, including 401k and a really healthy match. What's the best way to reach these students, or excuse me, now students that turn into employees in the workforce, and teach them about financial literacy?
Um, it's a good question. I think that it really does depend on your company. I think the best way to do it
Mm,
from a company perspective is really aligning your programs to either what your products or services are or what your mission of the business is. The more you
mm,
can connect that back to your values, the mission, fundamentals of the business, the more impactful I think it's going to click for employees. It's going to feel like also part of a cohesive benefits package that your company is providing to really make sure that people understand why you're doing this. Otherwise, it can kind of feel a little bit more like a laundry list of like check boxes. And
yeah.
so I do encourage employers to really think about all the things they're offering, whether it's financial, whether it's wellness and mental well-being, whether it's core benefits. Like they really should be thinking about this from a strategic perspective that's part of a portfolio that connects back to like, what do you want employees to remember about your company? Is it what you do? Is it how you do it? Is it why you're all here? How can you make sure that that is interspersed within all of your programs? I think for us at Handshake, to give like a more tangible example,
Yeah.
we understand that our mission is really about democratizing opportunity for students. That's
Mm,
very resonant to many of the people, to all the people that work here, and I think that's the reason why a lot of people have come as well to work at Handshake. What we've tried to do is make sure that we have programs like we partner with a company called Origin, that's like a financial advising company, and
mm,
they're really intended to make sure that like everyone has the opportunity to speak with a financial advisor, so it's not just something that is reserved for those who have enough money or that know enough to go to a financial advisor. We offer this to all employees so they're able to get that benefit early on and not be kind of left behind just because they don't know enough to ask about it. That's kind of how we've structured a lot of our programs, is really from that lens of like we want to make sure everyone has access to this thing that historically maybe has only been reserved for people who know enough to ask for it or who have been in a situation where they already have experience with that.
I love that. I love that answer. So make sure that your benefits align to your core mission. And if you really want to help employees, particularly young employees, give them access that they wouldn't have. Love that. So I think it was last year you changed up your employee stock program, which you had in place for years. Can you tell us more about the changes that you made and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is another one where it really relates back to our mission of creating access.
Mm,
We are a startup. We are a privately held startup. Like
mm,
many companies, we had offered stock options for a long time, which means that you have to pay to exercise the option, but you have tax advantages down the line when there's a liquidity event like an IPO or an acquisition or something like that. Um, that works really well when you're a smaller company and your valuation is lower because it's accessible. It doesn't cost that much to exercise your options. However, the bigger the company gets, the higher your valuation grows, so does the price to exercise. And we started to
mm,
find that, especially for employees who are maybe coming in with their first job out of college, second job out of college, or were in roles that are not as that the salaries are not as high as other ones,
mhm,
they were frequently saying, we actually don't feel like we can exercise this option to own stock. So we can't feel like an owner in this company because the cost to exercise is blocking us from doing
mm,
so. And so we started to look at shifting our stock approach to offering RSUs as well as stock options. And RSUs are what you would think of with a traditional public company. They're just kind of straight up common stock. The benefit of these is that you don't have to pay to exercise them. There are taxes and they come out after the fact, but you're not having to pay up front in order to be an owner. As long as you've worked for the company and you meet the time-based requirements, you're able to have equity. And we started to realize that we wanted to move in that direction to make sure that our equity remained tangible for people and they could feel like, okay, I'm going to this time that I'm putting in with this company, this work I'm putting in, it is going to benefit me because I know I have this waiting for me as I, kind of month over month, year over year. So we made that switch last year, kind of a more of a slower transition where we offered both options and RSUs for a time. And now we're fully on RSUs that we offer to new hires and as well as refresher grants to existing employees. And we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback because it's not a worry for people in the back of their mind of like, am I going to be able to
Yeah.
do anything with this equity down the line? It makes it more tangible. It makes it real, which also helps people have that ownership mentality that we think is really
Mhm.
important to do great work.
Absolutely. If I can switch gears on you, because I have so many questions for you. I love Handshake. I love everything that you're about. One thing that you really encourage is not just connecting college graduates with employers, but you also encourage internships, which I absolutely love. Can you tell us a little bit more about why internships are so important and why they're important not only for the college grad, but for the employer?
Yeah. I mean, internships are I think are even more important now than they were 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. When I was in college, between 10 and 15 years ago, I'll leave it nice and vague. Uh, it was not the norm for people to have an internship during the summer
Mm.
at my college, which was a respected like major public university. Some people did, but it was not standard practice whatsoever. Now, when you talk to students, they're very focused on having an internship because they
Mhm.
know that it's almost kind of a requirement to get that full-time job. If you don't have that on your resume, the question is why? Why have you not done that? And so I think of it as for the students, I think that the benefits are really obvious. I think it helps teach you and prepare you for the professional world. It helps you learn what an office is like, what are dynamics in a professional setting, what are kind of those norms that a lot of people kind of take for granted, but you don't come in knowing right off the bat. I think it's incredibly helpful for that kind of preparation. For employers, it's an opportunity to build a brand and build loyalty with a workforce that's going to become, the leaders or like the really significant ICs within a company within the next 5 to 7 years. So it is a long-term strategy play, but it also helps you in building that brand and building that resonance over time. So they do help in both ways, both from a student side and an employer side. I think it's important in both directions.
It is. I sit on the Collegiate Women in Business Board at my alma mater and had the opportunity last week to have this panel of students speak to our board. And one of the things that they kept talking about was Handshake and about getting an internship. And I said, "Isn't that funny? I'm talking to Paloma next week on Voices of HR," and they had nothing but good things to say. But a couple of things that they said about internships was that they did get to go into the workforce because being a student is very different. And they got to see firsthand whether the company was as described, which I thought was really intuitive. And they got to kind of test drive whether they would want to work at that organization. Or, like one of them she made it her goal to have a different internship every year. And she even got an internship as a freshman because she was such a high performer. So someone took a chance on her as a freshman, which I think is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a great point. Students are so savvy now, that
Yes.
they really do want to make sure that they are, again, like job stability. They want to make sure that they're landing somewhere that they feel really good about, that there's not going to be any
Mhm.
surprises, or that they can minimize the number of surprises as much as they can. So we hear a lot from students who really do want to make sure that they're experiencing maybe multiple different kinds of industries or different types of companies through their college experience, through the internship opportunities that they have. You also hear that people do feel really strongly about making sure that the company, maybe the role actually even looks the same as what they're hoping, because a
Mm.
job title can mean very different things at different companies. And so getting a
Mhm.
sense of like what that work actually looks like at one company versus another, I think is important knowledge and learning for the students.
So, what do you think? Because we asked them, and we actually asked the board members too, and I would love your opinion on this. What do you think are like the top 3 things that employers need to know about successfully onboarding these new college graduates.
Yeah. As interns or as like in new career roles or
I
early
would
career
say
roles?
let's switch it up. Let's go new career roles.
Yeah. Um, I think one of the really important pieces that we've found to be successful is building cohorts and building communities for these new grads to come in together
Mhm.
with. I think that that's a natural step as part of an internship program because it's a summer program, right? So things start on a certain date, they end when it's
True.
time to go back to school. But if you can, creating still that sense of cohort and community for new grads coming to the workforce so they have people that they can talk to and go to, I think is really important. We've revamped our onboarding program over the past year to really focus on creating these senses of cohorts, even not just for early talent like or new grad employees, but
Mm,
like across the board. And it's so helpful because you have these people who are like learning the norms of the company and
right.
other pieces that maybe aren't even functionally specific at the same time as you that you can go to ask questions. Hey, did you have trouble enrolling for benefits because I couldn't quite figure this out? Oh,
Mm,
what days are you going to the office? Because I'm going to go on these days. Will I see you there? Those kinds of organic connections really help people feel a sense of belonging and community within the company. So cohorts is one.
mm,
I think two is making the implicit explicit as much as possible. I think this is a generation and this is like a talent cohort that are really looking to be well informed. And so
mhm,
if you're and I think this also goes back to the idea of access. So really making sure that you're being quite intentional about describing what your norms are at your company. What are the expectations of someone in their new role? What do you do on certain days in the office if you're doing like a flexible schedule or a hybrid schedule? Being very intentional and explicit about that really helps them understand the culture and the norms. And I think that's even more important in an environment where maybe people are remote still or working in a hybrid environment where they're not going to pick up on that stuff organically like they would if they were just kind of side by
mhm,
side in an office. So cohorts, I think making the explicit or making the implicit explicit. And then the third piece is don't forget about the fun. I think
mm.
starting a new job should feel a little intimidating and a little exciting, and entering the workforce should feel exactly that way as well. But you should have some fun. You should have some joy within the
Mhm.
experience because this is a group. This is a generation that has not really had that kind of those like big life moments in the way that they maybe hoped they were going to have. They went into college and it was virtual, right? They're leaving college and it's
Right.
economic uncertainty. So maybe if you're creating these experiences for them that maybe do feel a little bit more synonymous with what they hoped like these milestones looked like, that's going to be really meaningful for them. So don't neglect the employee programming, the employee experience aspect of things.
So you had mentioned this earlier that Gen Z, new college graduates today, really put an emphasis on company culture and values. What are companies doing right? What are the best companies, I should say, doing right today when it comes to that?
I think being very consistent and authentic is the most
Mm,
important thing that a company can do because people can tell when you're not being authentic and you're not
mhm,
being real and it's not feeling connected to how you've acted before or what was sold to them maybe when they were discussing if they should take the offer or not. They can feel that. And so I think you don't need to shy away from hard truths, but you need to be authentic and honest because that's how you build trust within your new employees. And I think that's also how you create a culture of trust as well. Um, if you're not being authentic, if you're creating things that just create more questions for your workforce,
mm,
that becomes a much bigger problem down the line. Um, this is a time where a lot of people are having to tighten budgets and having to pull things back and maybe do more with less. If you can get ahead of that, if you can acknowledge that, if you can own that as a company, that's going to put you in a much better position than it is to kind of shy away from it or hide it or try to like sugarcoat it because people will see through that. And so I think there's that. And then there's always just making sure that the values, the principles that you operate by are really consistent and people can feel like they're being lived out. At Handshake, we recently revamped our values into what we call Handshake principles that are really intended to be very authentic and accurate expectations of what it's like to work at Handshake. Who are the type of people that
Mm.
are attracted to work here? Why do we do our work? How do we work with each other? What do we expect of our leaders? And we're building this into a lot of programming. So it's not just things on a wall, but people actually see how it comes to life and it feels very consistent. And we've gotten a lot of feedback since we rolled it out back in August of these do feel very aligned with what success looks like at Handshake, with how we operate right now. And I think that's reassuring for people. There's no surprises.
I love that. So, what should HR do? Because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking there is a PR element to this, that what you're speaking to your customers, to the outside, resonating your brand, right? Through different communications. How should HR and PR or marketing better align?
You need to be working hand in hand.
Mm.
I talk to our head of comms, our chief communications officer, at least once a day, if not more. During busy
Wow.
times, we're on the phone multiple times a day. We have an incredibly great working relationship. Same with marketing as well. We understand where we're headed and we understand what we're trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of consistency and awareness across those lanes. Um, I think to one of the points you mentioned earlier, the importance of a talent brand is so important for how employees feel about their company. If they're seeing that, if they're not feeling great about it, it's going to show up in your talent brand through Glassdoor, through whatever. There's a way to manage through change in a way that feels authentic and honest, and there's a way to not. Um, so it's important to make sure that all of your partners, your close working partners, from like a PR and brand perspective, are all on the same page on what your goals are because they affect each other very strongly.
Are there any companies besides Handshake that are getting it right today with regards to everything that we've talked about?
It's a really good question. Um, I think we look at some of the companies that Handshake partners with. Honestly, we know a lot about how they think about their philosophies internally, how they think about their long-term talent strategies, how they think about the culture they're trying to create very deliberately. And it feels like they understand what Gen Z wants, what Gen Z needs as they're kind of entering the workforce. They also have a really good understanding of what what the rest of their employees want as well. I think a couple examples that we have from that work with us that again we have a lot of knowledge of exactly how they're going about this work. So Citibank and its subsidiaries, they have really invested in on like a talent development program, talent transformation, but they're also investing in things like their wellness programs, making sure that employees have access to the things they need. So they're hitting not just the stability, it's a very well-known brand. It's a very, I think people feel a little grounded when they're talking about that. But they also are hitting these quadrants of like wellness and mental health. They're hitting this quadrants of like financial security. They're hitting this quadrants of like talent strategy and development. So I think that's a really good way of like how they're making sure that their employees see the investments that are happening in these ways. Hilton is another company that's doing very similar work, and they have a Thrive with Hilton program, which I think is also hitting on that wellness and mental well-being that's ringing true for employees because it feels connected to how they want to approach their work.
Which is going to benefit all new hires
Yep.
and employees, which is fantastic. Another reason to love Gen Z. Just one more reason. All right, so we are unfortunately coming to the end, but at the end we have something called rapid fire questions. So
Mm-hmm.
these are one sentence questions with one sentence answers. Are you willing to play?
I am willing to play.
All right, let's do it. What's the biggest challenge you're facing as an HR leader today?
It's been 3 years of unprecedented times, and there's a new crisis every month. So keeping up with all of those needs while remaining focused on like the long-term needs of the business and the employees is a constant struggle, I think, for any HR leader that I know.
So how do you deal with it?
I am ruthless at prioritization, and making sure that every week and almost every day I am highly focused on what I need to accomplish that day, while also keeping an eye towards the longer term goals over quarterly and annually. But ruthless prioritization.
What is your first 90-day playbook as a new head of HR? What would you recommend they focus on?
I recommend anyone coming into an HR leadership role spend their first 30 days listening and understanding how the business operates. Because whatever you try and implement, if you haven't done that listening tour, will likely fall flat because so much of HR is getting people to trust in your vision and trust and align with you on what you want to accomplish. You'll also, I think, frequently see that maybe the issues that one leader sees are not the same issues that other leaders see. And so the first 30 days should be listening. The next 30 days should be identifying problems. The last 30 days should be building the plans to solve them.
What is the one skill or talent you have that has propelled you to the big seat in HR?
I try to be a very good listener for people and create an environment where people can give me feedback, can share thoughts, even if it's critical of things that maybe I'm responsible for or driving, and they feel comfortable doing that with me. That has allowed me to feel like I can be like a trusted leader within the organization when driving change. And I'm very, very good at multitasking.
Very good. Love it. What's the main takeaway you want to leave our listeners with today?
One thing we talked about internships, but one thing we didn't talk about too much is alternatives to internships that companies can have. It's something that we've been exploring heavily at Handshake because we're no different than many other companies. We're being really conscious of our spend, figuring out how to do more with less this year, but also trying to make sure that even if we're hiring fewer people, we're still developing our workforce in a way that is really meaningful for them and both what the company needs. And I just want to make sure that HR leaders who are listening are aware that there's more than one way to do this. You can do things that don't have an actual dollar price tag attached to them. For example, internal mentorship programs, apprenticeship programs, both of which we've offered at Handshake and are in the process of bringing back. You can do that. It's not going to cost you any money in upfront costs. It's just going to cost you the investment of time internally. And if you do it well, it's going to pay out dividends like significantly more than what you've put into it because you have people that are engaged, that have tons of context on the business and the product and the people within it. And they're also seeing this as a place where they can continue their own career growth and they can share that with other people. So it's improving the work you're doing on the business side, it's improving the retention of your employees, and it's improving your talent brand as a whole. So just because you're budget constrained, don't think you don't have options for reskilling or development internally. These programs, there's a lot of resources on how you can get them started, and they're really impactful.
Where can people go to learn more about you?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. My name there is Paloma Thombley. I post things and share things about what our company is doing, as well as some exciting work that I see happening with my colleagues and peers in the HR space. Yeah, that's the best place.
So today we have been joined by Paloma Thombley, VP of People at Handshake. Thank you again so much for joining me, Paloma. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you. This was great.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HRMorning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.